Your experiment today is called Wild Rebels.
It's a cool, swinging, heavy trip.
What is that noise?
This time we watched Season 2, Episode 7, Wild Rebels.
In which a bunch of bikers hopped up on goofballs are robbing banks for kicks in Florida.
Oh, but first, some follow-up about our previous biker movie, The Side Hackers.
We have to talk about it again? That was a rough one, Chris.
We just need to mention one thing. It's the sort of thing where if I don't mention it, we'll get letters. I failed to mention something. We got letters. Several people wrote in to remind me that Michael Pataki, who played JC, the lead baddie guy in The Side Hackers, in addition to being in the KTMA episode Superdome, which we did mention, was also in Season 10's It Lives by Night, playing the Sergeant.
Oh.
That's an episode that I actually haven't seen yet, so that's one of the reasons why I missed it, and I also just didn't notice it on his filmography.
IMDb or whatever.
Yeah. My bad. I absolutely missed that. Sorry about that. You're right. He's there. Someday I'll watch that episode. Maybe it's a good one. Maybe it's not.
We'll find out.
I'm saving it for when we do the episode on it.
Fair enough.
But thank you all for writing in. Like, I appreciate it. And
yes.
I just felt really bad about having missed it.
It's okay, Chris. You can't catch everything. You do a really phenomenal job of catching what you can, though.
I mean, it's lovely to hear that from you, but it's the listeners' opinions who really matter in the end.
Oh, gosh. Fine. No, it's true. The listeners are important. And it's amazing, though, when you have a bunch of listeners, they, of course, have expertise that goes far beyond any of the tendrils that we can send out on our own. So it's always wonderful to have listeners fact-checking us and sharing their experiences, too.
Oh, yeah. And many, if not all of our listeners, have watched all of these episodes more often than I have or other people have, for the most part.
Certainly the sci-fi episodes, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. And that's fine. Like, I'd like to think that we bring other things to the table than knowledge of every single second of every single episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Like, that's not what we're here to do, is to know all of that. So naturally, some of our listeners are going to have a much deeper knowledge about every moment of the show.
Sure. And some of those moments will have hit them differently than they hit us, so they'll remember them better. It's true.
Exactly.
Turns out we're all different people bringing something to the table. It's so beautiful.
In other news, Charlotte, I will see you soon in person, in the flesh.
Yay!
Because we will be at MST3K, which should be happening in a few days after this episode goes out. So if you're going to go there...
Wait, does that mean that you figured out how to say it? Because in our last episode, you were worried about how does the MST3K con go. So is it truly MST3Con?
I don't know. It's just letters. It's just letters and a number, you know.
MST3Con!
Yeah, the Wrath of MST3K.
Totally.
That's what we're going to be experiencing.
Oh my gosh, that's going to be so much fun.
So if you are there, look for us and say hi and tell me what I failed to mention in this episode. It's cool. Just be nice about it. Like everybody who wrote in about the Michael Pataki thing was super nice about it. It's all good.
That's because we have awesome listeners.
Yeah. One other thing, Megaphonic, our network, has a new podcast on board, and I think some of our listeners might be very excited about it. Who knows if they watch other TV shows beyond MST3K. There's a new show on the network called Waystar Corncob.
Oh, what do they watch?
They watch two shows. They watch the TV drama Succession.
Okay.
Which just wrapped up its final season. They do a rewatch of that. And they also watch the sketch comedy show I Think You Should Leave.
Oh.
And they can't help but notice how similar those two shows are.
Oh, wow. Because I would have said, what a weird juxtaposition. But these things are moving parts that fit together really well. That must be interesting.
It must be. Yeah, no, it's an interesting overlap. They're both sort of about people who are deeply cringe or do deeply cringe things, let's say. And it's the podcast, they do a good job of exploring why you might want to watch shows like that. So that's pretty cool. If you want to check it out, go to megaphonic.fm/Waystar. We'll have a link in the show notes. Check it out. Welcome them. They're nice people.
Welcome, Waystar Corncob.
All right, but It is time for us to talk about these wild rebels.
Wild Rebels. This time we watch Season 2, Episode 7, Wild Rebels. Rod Tillman just can't catch a break. Here he is, a super awesome race car driver, but after years of racing and saving, a single accident on the track burns that dream to ashes. He immediately auctions off his trailer and hits the road with $450 in his pocket, looking for a new adventure with his trusty guitar. Traveling the countryside, a biker gang sees Rod at a dance club and attempts to recruit him as their getaway driver. Rod passes on the offer, and the threatening gang just lets him go? Yes, because head biker Jeter says he'll be back. Give him a month, and he'll be hungry for their offer. And maybe even just plain hungry. Banjo, unhinged violent sidekick, is not so sure. The third big guy never talks, so I'm not sure how he feels. And Linda, girlfriend to, I'm not sure, maybe the whole gang in turns, she eagerly awaits Rod's return. Also eagerly waiting for an opportunity are the police. Yes, the cops have been trying to take down this biker gang for a while now. The gang robs places all the time, and sure, the cops arrest them, but nothing sticks. The gang's just too smart. They don't even seem to be interested in the money. Perhaps they rob for the kicks? Yes, kicks is the name of the game. In a Point Break-esque turn of events, the cops recruit Rod to join the gang and take them down from the inside. Somehow this is the opportunity that catches Rod's attention. He is so square, man. So the cops help Rod rejoin the car race circuit and crash a new car. The bikers swoop in to the seemingly vulnerable Rod and bring him into their fold. Let the heists begin. The woman playing Linda is apparently the best actor on set because in a Victor Victoria-esque swish, she's a lady who pretends to be a robbing biker, pretending to be a lady in order to rob folks. It's just that kicksy. I mean, when the gun store owner says to her demure lady persona that the first rule of gun ownership is never to point a gun at another person, and Linda says back, not even if you're going to rob them, I knew this was a first-rate heist. With all their newly acquired guns, ammo, and money, the gang zero in on a new target, the bank. They may not use masks of presidents, but they do knock out the guard and get away with all the teller's cash. And they might have gotten away with it if Rod, remember Rod, hadn't flashed his brights at the cops. Man, he is so square. The gang force Rod to drive them out of there, and in a dull chase scene through several ineffective police blockades, the gang end up cornered in a lighthouse with a cool spiral staircase. There's a super big, everyone shoots guns at each other scene, many people die, and ultimately Linda saves Rod by shooting Jeter. Man, she really loves her kicks, and Rod's sure gonna miss her murderous ways. The end.
Meanwhile, on the satellite of love, GPC is feeling a bit glum, depressed, a bit of the old ennui. Turns out she spends most of her energy running the higher functions of the ship, and that's why she has trouble talking sometimes. Joel has Crow and Tom take over some of her functions so that he can have a heart-to-heart with her, and it seems to help. And so we get our first glimpse of the smart and sensitive side of GPC. Down in Deep 13, Dr. F and Frank have invented the biker hobby horse, the hobby hog, for the kid who's tired of pretending to be a cowboy. Joel responds with some 3D pizza, based on the 3D chess from Star Trek, so that's neat, I guess. After some movie, the bots are impressed with how eloquent one of the bikers is, and Joel offers an educational presentation on other eloquent bikers, such as the Algonquin group, That's right. Dorothy Parker, George S. Kaufman, and the gang all like to dress up in their leathers and go vroom. Even later New York intellectuals like Bennett Cerf and Truman Capote were in on the action. We interrupt this movie for a commercial message with one of the catchiest earworms this show ever gave us. Wild Rebels, crunchy, fruity Rebels is part of a balanced, if incredibly violent, breakfast. How come my Frosted Flakes never came with a chunk of hose filled with lead shot? Well, after some romantic crooning from our hero, Joel decides to sing a romantic song to GPC, which is maybe a little weird given Joel's usually parental role to the bots, but it's all played for laughs and GPC doesn't really care, as she says she's in it for the kicks. And when the movie's over, Crow and Tom are feeling just awful, but Joel's flying high. Turns out if you can recognize how ridiculous a movie is, it's easier to stomach the rough bits, which is more or less something I said during our episode on the side hackers. Turns out I learned everything I know about film criticism from Joel. Well, what do you think, sirs?
Aw, I have to say, I thought GPC doing it for kicks was also her kind of setting Joel up to be taken down by Crow and Tom, which was super fun to see. Because even when she's, using a lot of her higher thinking to do the ship, like she's still in a conspiracy with those other two to take down Joel. Super fun.
Certainly in that scene. How did Wild Rebels find you? Was it as traumatic as the side hackers?
It was absolutely not as traumatic as the side hackers, though once again, I think that the segments that they were doing were way stronger than the riffing and the movie were hitting. The movie is definitely set up to be like we have this outsider guy who's sort of recruited by the gang but never truly accepted by them. And the gang does horrible things, but this is really, like a cop movie trying to take down the gang more than it is a, let's follow our lovable gang members as they mess things up for everyone around them. So, it hit differently because it did seem like a very typical cops trying to take down a gang. I mean, typical even to the point where they just have this big shooting fest at the end and everyone dies, as you warned me about last time.
Yeah, I don't know. I think had the shootout at the end not happened, had they gotten away with the crime, I think the gang probably would have killed Rod.
Oh, well, yeah, because he signaled the cops. So.
No, but even if he hadn't done that, he was there to be used and disposed of, I think. But at the same time, it's hard to tell. Certainly Banjo doesn't like him.
No, but maybe Banjo respects him more now that he's beaten him up. I don't know. It seems like all of our movies with men, you have that whole, I don't really like you very much and I'm not going to go along, but you punched me in the face and now we're besties. There's a lot of that going on. So maybe Banjo would have accepted him into his little banjo heart now that they've beaten each other up.
Maybe. What did you think about Linda? I was reading a critic talking about this movie, and they were arguing about how Linda is sort of the most interesting figure in the movie, and arguably one of the most interesting women in the biker oeuvre, the outlaw biker canon, simply for her independence and her unwillingness to be tied down to normie society.
I mean, certainly the speech that she gives Rod, although, it's definitely the, look who's going for the Oscar, but it's definitely I don't want to conform. I don't want to have kids. I don't want to get married. I want some other sort of outcome for my life. And it's a shame that a life of crime is the only thing that she finds as an alternative to all of that. I would argue there were other alternatives in the 60s besides, messing stuff up with a bunch of dumbass bikers, but I don't know. But yes, she definitely is the more interesting of the character. And she seems to be far more central to the gang actually pulling things off. She seems to be the one doing all of the planning. She seems to be the one, well, maybe not all of the planning, but she seems to be doing all of the groundwork, finding out all of the information. She's doing all the recon for that. She's putting on a persona that's going to totally pull in the mainstream society people in order to then be able to take them down. So she definitely is far more challenging of norms than anyone else. But I don't know. She's She's still not the aspirational character you might want to have in the only woman in the movie, except for the woman who hits on Rod in the beginning.
I think you were right at the beginning when saying this movie is sort of a bit meh. I mean, but there are a few set pieces, and you pointed out the scene where she is robbing the gun shop as being one of them, which I think is absolutely right. That's a really fun interaction that happens. Mm-hmm. I always remembered this movie for the ending sequence, for the
lighthouse,
even the bank robbing sequence, but especially the lighthouse. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of MST3K movies, the opening and closing are the strongest bits. And, middles are hard. Fair enough. But I remember this. The other thing about this movie that I always remember is that for an MST3K riffed movie, wow, there's a lot of swastikas.
Yeah. I did not remember that from previous viewings either. Or I guess it didn't stick in my memory because it's almost barely recognized by the characters in the movie. It's a weird window dressing for having a bad biker gang. I mean, like, they're bad. Look, they have swastikas.
Yeah, but this is very true to life. Like a lot of the outlaw biker gangs in the 60s and before used swastikas and iron crosses. They stopped doing that eventually, and apparently, from what I can tell, and I'm not really an expert on this, it's now seen as very old-fashioned to do that.
Oh, old-fashioned, not wrong? I mean...
Oh, definitely more old-fashioned than wrong is the vibe I'm getting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, it was absolutely a thing.
It's so interesting because I thought, as I was watching it and seeing all the swastikas, it was like, well, okay, so this movie's being made in like the 60s. It's not very far away from the defeat of the Nazis inside of World War II. Putting swastikas on things is a way to signal somebody's, like, badness, right? Like how horrible they are and how destructive they are, right? And how, like, I was reading it as just like, oh, well, if I was using a swastika on something inside of the 60s, like, I would be trying to communicate how awful I am, right? Because we've socially accepted, as far as the 60s go, that the swastikas are representing something that was truly awful, right? I mean, if you put this, I don't know, next to The Sound of Music, when you see swastikas in The Sound of Music, you know that those are bad guys. When you see swastikas even inside of the Indiana Jones movies, you know those are the bad guys, right? So it's an easy way to be signaling that. But you're saying that, no, this is just a way for them to signal that they're bikers?
No. Well, here's the thing. So not all bikers, hashtag, I guess. This is particularly what they would call the 1%ers, which is to say the 1% of bikers who try to live like outlaws and épater la bourgeoisie, as they say, to shock the normies, to horrify the squares. Like that was what they were all about. And it came from a statement about how 99% of bikers were all basically normal people that some biking group put out. I forget the details. But point is, they were using this Nazi memorabilia, they would say, to shock people, to annoy normies, because they knew it would get under their skin.
Wouldn't they have already been shocked by being linked with Satan and being linked with the Hells Angels? Because, Satan's angels, that's a little on the nose for the Hells Angels, don't you think?
I mean, if your goal is to shock people, I don't think you're going to say, you know what, I've had enough shocking. We've done enough. They're like, no, we're going to add another layer to it.
Seriously, Chris, if you wanted to shock people in the 60s, the only thing you had to do was be friends with a black person. I mean, come on.
Well, and here's the thing. A lot of biker gang people were not going to do that.
Obviously. God.
It was mixed. It's more complicated, but there were definitely some outlaw biker groups who were white supremacists and fully understood what they were doing.
In that there were white supremacists in many walks of life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But the outlaw bikers were certainly, some of them knew what they were doing. Some of them claimed that, it became part of biker tradition just because World War II vets became bikers. And so they were bringing home memorabilia. Like, we got this from the people we defeated, and so we're going to show it off to show that we are true Americans and victors, so to speak.
Like wearing the armor of Achilles after you defeat him in battle?
Exactly. But if that's true, it's a little hard to say.
Yeah, I don't know. It still seems like you would not want to be associated with that imagery.
Yeah, you'd think. But, that imagery continued to serve as that kind of shocking the normies thing. Like, punks would do it a lot in the late 70s, early 80s, wear swastikas and so forth. And it even still continues. I think a lot of people who end up getting into that stuff nowadays do it at first to shock the normies and then sort of are hanging out with a crowd that agrees with white supremacist ideas and it normalizes it. And yeah, I don't know. It's complicated. It's real weird to see it in an MST3K episode this much and for them to only call it out a little bit. But
yeah,
when this came out in 1990, we weren't taking Nazis and Nazi symbols as seriously as we do today, perhaps.
No, and I think that they were still being dismissed at that point in time, right?
Yeah, it was real easy to say, oh, this is just a weird relic from the past, and these people are very silly.
Yes, and nobody thinks that way anymore.
No,
well, okay,
we're feeling the pinch a little bit more these days, let's say, yeah. It's time for our favorite segment, Familiar Faces.
Is there Theme Squad?
No. Theme Squad is telling me no, they're still thinking about this. Listener, if you have ideas for what the music for this segment should sound like, please write in.
I feel like by the time there's a theme music for it, we'll be done doing Familiar Faces.
The very last episode we do, we'll unveil it. This movie, you might think to yourself, doesn't have a lot of familiar faces in it.
I mean, I didn't recognize any faces inside of it, beyond some people you might see in a couple MST3Ks.
Well, not even that, really. But, yeah, this is going to be a fairly short segment. Hey, there's one actor in this film that you have seen in another movie. I am 99% sure. Can you guess which one it is?
No, not even remotely. Okay, wait. Is it one of the college guys that they beat up inside of the bar?
No, it's one of the main characters.
Oh, one of the main characters. The guy who plays Jeter.
Nope.
Who?
It's the guy who plays the unfortunately named Fats.
Oh, what was he in?
He was in A Christmas Story.
Oh, was he Santa or something?
He was Santa Claus.
Oh. Wow.
Yep. So A Christmas Story was directed by a guy named Bob Clark, who directed a lot of movies. He directed Porky's. He directed Rhinestone. And
Rhinestone with Dolly Parton and Sylvester Stallone, where he becomes a country singer?
Yeah, that movie, which I'm told is not very good.
I'll second that, but it does do some interesting things.
Yeah. So those are all by the same director, and Jeff Gillen was part of his stable. Bob Clark, like the director of this movie, emerged from Florida, and so Jeff Gillen had been in a few of his movies, including Bob Clark's first movie, a little film called She-Man.
What? There was a movie called She-Man?
She-Man, A Story of Fixation, came out in 1967, and it is the story of a military veteran who is the son of a senator who gets blackmailed and force feminized.
What?
Is abducted and forced to take hormones, estrogen.
Oh my God.
And is forced to dress up in women's clothing and serve as this woman named Dominita as her maid. And live that way for a year.
Oh my God. I can't even. What do they do in Florida that's the idea that they come up with?
Well, here's the thing. Forced feminization is a thing that some people are really into the concept of.
Sure.
It's a real turn on for some people. And it's one of these exploitation movies that, it's got a scientist at the beginning. It's one of those movies. It's like Leonard Nimoy. It's got a scientist at the beginning who explains that this is based on a true story and we're going to learn stuff from it. I watched it. It's kind of interesting. There's actually some really interesting visuals in it. It's not really a good movie, but there's some interesting stuff in it. And I was reading some reviews of it, and a lot of trans people who were watching it were like, this movie feels like it's supposed to be for me and is not.
No, it sounds like it's for people who have the fear of being forced to switch gender.
And are turned on by that fear.
Yeah, it does not sound...
Yeah, it's weird. But it is still remarkable. It's still a remarkable artifact from 1967. I'm not too upset that I watched it, let's put it that way.
Oh, well, that's good, at least.
Other than Jeff Gillen, though, everybody else in this film mostly made films with the director of this film, William Grefé, who is still alive, still with us, still working, it seems, and making movies, based in southern Florida, had a bit of an ensemble, a lot like Ed Wood or
Yeah,
people like that.
sure.
Just made these movies.
More biker movies or?
Not necessarily. I mean, he's, continued well past the biker era,
Fair enough.
but a lot of them were real bad.
Do you mean like bad people or bad actors?
Oh, no, the movies are bad.
Oh, well, that's not shocking, but okay.
In particular, a lot of these people, Rod and Jeter and Banjo and Fats, all show up again in a movie called The Naked Zoo.
Huh. Do I want to know?
Well, it's about shenanigans going on in Coconut Grove in Miami, where there's a ladies' man who's not played by any of these people, played by somebody else entirely. But he's
Not played by Rod, who is clearly desired by every woman in the film, both of them?
This is an incredibly unlikable person, but one of the people that he is seducing is played by Rita Hayworth.
What?
Yep.
What?
Who, like a lot of classic film stars who are women, could not get work to save their life in the later years.
Yes, because you can't be over 40.
Exactly. So she ends up in this. I could not finish this film. I tried watching it. It is absolutely terrible. There's nothing redeeming about it.
Not even Rita Hayworth?
Not even Rita Hayworth. No, she's phoning it in.
Ugh. That's too bad. Maybe Van Doren would never have phoned it in.
No. I'm not blaming her for it, though. She was not paid well enough to not phone it in.
Sure.
There is an interview that somebody did quite recently on YouTube with William Grefé. I will put a link in the show notes. It is very long, and I did not have the energy to sit through it all. But I'm glad it was done, and I definitely approve of people talking to these sort of obscure and maybe even not very good artists while they're still alive and while you can still find out what's going on. Because it is interesting when these small scenes show up. This just doesn't seem to have been a particularly worthwhile one to investigate, though. Listener, if you disagree, please, write in and I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah.
There's only one other thing I want to talk about, and that is Rod Tillman, played by Steve Alaimo.
Okay.
Steve Alaimo is from Miami, and he was a musician before he became an actor, as you might have guessed.
I certainly thought he might have been a singer-songwriter. Who knows?
Yeah, he is perhaps most known for hosting and co-producing a show called Where the Action Is.
Where is the action, Chris?
Well, it's in Florida. It was a spinoff of American Bandstand that Dick Clark sort of founded. He also had put out a few albums. He has a weird record attached to his name. He is apparently the person with the most Billboard Hot 100 charting singles that has never reached the top 40.
Oh.
He had 9 singles chart the top 100, but none that made it up to the top 40.
Are any of them ones that I would recognize?
Not really, no. And I will say the other thing that I found really interesting about him was that in 1963, he put out an album. Mm-hmm. It's called Every Day I Have to Cry.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that poor man.
It has a really awful 1963 glossy soft focus photo of him with curtains around him or something with kind of a look on his face.
Looking like Lee Hazelwood or something like that.
Yeah. It's a concept album. All the songs are about crying.
Okay, well, I mean, if I had 9 hits that made it into the top 100 but never broke the top 40, I might cry every day too. Especially if that was my goal in life, there are lots of people who are able to achieve their goals and who get there, right? I just watched the Wham documentary that's on Netflix, and it's look at these kicky young guys who were able to actually actualize their dreams and launch one of them really into superstardom, right? And it must be hard to be the hundreds of people for every one that makes it who don't realize their dreams. But for this poor guy to have made it so close, to have gotten songs in the charts.
And a TV show, a national TV show.
A national TV show. Even Lawrence Welk was happy with his life, though.
I gotta say, I tried to listen to Every Day I Have to Cry, thinking, oh, this is brilliant. I love this concept. I want it to be great.
Sure.
It's not. It's fine at best. He does not sound sad, which I think is kind of the main thing you should sound like if you're putting out an album about how you want to cry in every song.
If you're going to be suggesting that you cry every day, I don't know. Some of the people who cry the most are the ones who seem happy when they're around other people, though.
So, in May of 1970, Joan Didion, the author, the essayist, fell down a rabbit hole, and she watched 9 biker movies in 7 days. And she wrote about them in a column for Life magazine. And so in the column she says, to have seen one bike movie is to have seen them all. So meticulously observed are the rituals of getting the bikers out of town and onto the highway, of, quote, making a run, of terrorizing the innocent citizens and fencing with the highway patrol, and finally meeting death in a blaze, usually a quite literal blaze, of romantic fatalism.
Wow.
Which I think aptly sums the last 2 episodes we've watched.
Sure, yeah.
I feel like I have experienced what Joan Didion went through, because I have watched a bunch of biker movies over the last week, and I want to talk about all of them.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well, how many of them have violent rape scenes?
More than 0.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to brace myself for that, because that's always a little hard. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. The first one I watched was the OG, the Wild One from 1953, starring Marlon Brando as Johnny, the head of the Black Rebels Motorcycle Club, based on that short story I mentioned last episode about the Hollister riots.
Yes.
But not really trying to replicate that. It's just a bunch of bikers come into town and things spiral out of control.
And this is one of Marlon Brando's very first major roles, right?
Yeah, this I think really defined what he is all about.
Did you see why this launched him into such stardom?
I mean, he's very pretty in it if you like that sort of thing. And very pouty, and he's the sensitive one, of course.
Okay.
But he's also frustrated. He can't really talk and explain it. Oh, he's so bad. And he of course, falls in love with one of the local girls on first sight. And
is she like the pastor's daughter or something? Is she that good?
She is the one cop in town's daughter.
Oh, my gosh.
This is a one cop town, and she is the daughter.
There you go. The sheriff's daughter. It's the
Basically,
same.
yeah,
It's the same.
Yeah, yeah. And she's kind of always wanted to leave, but she's very normie, but she sort of sees something in him but it doesn't work out.
Does she think she can fix him? Is that what it is? She can save him?
No, interestingly.
Oh, well, that is an interesting twist, actually.
She does, however, in this moment that it's sort of all building up to their romantic thing, she does sort of realize that, no, this isn't going to work out. We can't bridge these distances. Which is an interesting move. The other interesting move is that the bikers come in and all the local business people are really upset about this, the potential property damage and so forth.
Sure.
So all these middle-aged white guys get together and talk to the sheriff, who is an old white guy as well.
Sure.
And say, what are you going to do about this? And the sheriff is they haven't done anything wrong yet. And when things start popping off between the businessmen and the bikers, the sheriff correctly diagnoses that both parties are at fault. The bikers are goading the locals.
Which is not hard to do.
And the locals are acting with the assurance that the law is on their side and are also instigating things and hurting bikers as well.
That sheriff doesn't sound like he's going to stay sheriff for very long.
Well, that's exactly the threat that they make to him. And it becomes this whole thing where eventually the locals decide that the sheriff is useless and they form a mob and go after the bikers and et cetera, et cetera. Complications happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting look at how the police function. Right? It's actually that I thought was in many ways the most interesting thing was this analysis of, oh no, the locals, the businessmen are bad, if not worse than the bikers.
Sure, they're a gang of their own.
Exactly. But they have the law on their side. I don't know. That was pretty interesting. Film's fine. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you watch it, but there's certainly things to enjoy if you do.
So one biker film worth watching, maybe.
Yeah, if you want to understand the genre, sure, you're not gonna have a terrible time with this film.
Okay.
The next film I watched is kind of a left field pick. It is called Scorpio Rising. It is a short film from 1963 made by the recently passed Kenneth Anger.
Okay.
It's about 30 minutes long. And it's a really influential film, but it is an experimental film that was shown in very art house theaters in New York and caused lots of problems because it is a very homoerotic film about bikers. And by film, I mean it's like a montage. It's sort of set to a dozen or so pop songs from the time,
okay,
1963-ish, and it's cut in a way that it was very influential to music videos of many years later as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it sort of, the plot, so to speak, moves from these very like loving images, the camera's gaze loving these guys who are working on their bikes and putting on their leathers. And eventually it becomes scenes of a party, a biker Sabbath, if you will, which includes lots of joking about and simulating gay sex that's happening throughout that scene.
Oh, okay.
And then it moves on to images of Nazi flags and images of Hitler and images of death, culminating all in a fatal motorcycle crash, which at least one source I saw suggested it actually is a fatal motorcycle crash that you're watching. Like the guy hurt his neck accidentally turning on a curve and it was caught on the film. I don't know if that's actually true or not because Kenneth Anger mythologized himself a lot.
Okay.
But I don't know.
Art house snuff film? I mean, really?
It is a pretty good movie. I mean, it's very much an experimental movie, but it is also like watching a really weird and dark and biker-oriented series of music videos. And it was incredibly influential because it was incredibly notorious, and it really brings out some of these ideas of like what bikers are doing and how dark it can get and how much of a lightning rod of controversy that can be.
Sure. Are they equating images of homosexuality with like Nazism? Is there some sort of parallel going on there, or is this just all anti-society that they're showing? I don't understand why those two things were juxtaposed.
I think Kenneth Anger was exploring how he was being turned on by these bikers.
Okay.
And it was 1963, so the idea of death and danger hung around that more than it would today, perhaps.
Okay.
So he that's my sense of it.
Okay.
Some of his other work that I've seen that predates this, like the film Fireworks, which is like an early gay short experimental film, is also involves scenes of him, hitting on sailors and then getting beaten up as part of the response to that. So, it feels like it's part of that kind of pre-Stonewall mindset.
Okay.
I don't know. That feels like a really bad and reductive way of saying it, but I only have a few minutes because I want to move on.
Oh, fair enough. I just wanted to understand that juxtaposition a little bit. And certainly like bikers and danger and death, like those, that makes more sense to me now. Thank you.
Yeah. And bikers and sort of the threat of homosexuality, as they would say at the time. Because we've seen that, right? Like, we've seen JC in the Side Hackers being a little bit queer, so to speak. And we also see that with the weird love arrangements in this movie, where, I mean, it is mostly focused on Linda sleeping with everybody. But there is some weird homosociality, homo flexibility seeming to go on with Jeter and the boys. So, hard to say.
Yeah.
But so I think that becomes part of the biker threat, is also this looming threat of a kind of openness towards sexuality.
Sure. I guess if you're like breaking with societal norms and, heterosexuality being a societal norm, that you're going to break with all of them.
Yeah.
In some sort of way. Yeah.
The next movie I watched was called The Wild Angels. It is from 1966, and this is the first 60s outlaw biker film proper.
What makes it a proper one?
Well, it's the one that kind of kicks the genre off. Like the Wild one from 53 with Brando, like they didn't get immediately copied in that same way. And Scorpio Rising didn't get copied in that way. But The Wild Angels kind of marries the two films, so to speak, and creates this product and like creates a genre out of it about the outlaw biker films. Not too surprising, it was directed by Roger Corman.
Aw, that man knows a formula, yeah.
Exactly, and it's coming out in 1966. Beach movies are on the decline, and so we're going to replace them with something new for the kids to love, and biker movies might just be it. And this movie was phenomenally financially successful.
I can't imagine beach movies being replaced by biker movies. They seem like two completely different things that you would be looking for as a moviegoer.
Perhaps, but it is sort of about young people in spaces where the rules of society don't apply.
Sure. And where you're young together and there are no adults around telling you what to do.
Except that in the biker movies, things end in a blaze of death. And that's kind of fun if you're tired of the sanitized, beach party bingo scene.
Sure. If I don't want to end with a dance party and people getting together, I guess.
Yeah. The Wild Angels stars Peter Fonda,
Oh.
Nancy Sinatra,
What?
Bruce Dern,
Oh my
and
gosh.
Diane Ladd.
Wow. That's a really amazing cast.
It is a very, very amazing cast. It is also a very, very dark movie. It gets way darker than Side Hackers.
Oh.
And yet, while I'm not saying you should watch it, I will say I found it a lot less upsetting than Side Hackers.
Oh. How come?
Well, because I think you are not encouraged to sympathize with them. There is no Ross Hagen-style character who is supposed to be your stand-in who bad things happen to. It is much more third person. You're watching like a documentary about these people who are awful in interesting ways and do terrible things to each other, but they're not you. Like, they're out there.
Yeah.
And so you're watching a sort of distant spectacle. And therefore, at least for me, I'm not taking it as personally. Like, some things are definitely potentially upsetting. There is sexual violence that happens. There's other stuff that happens. There's a really extended sequence in which there's a funeral scene, basically, that goes on for a while. And I don't really want to get into it. And it's a sort of notorious scene in terms of the excess of the debauchery that goes on with it, including debauchery involving the corpse. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
I will say, I think it's a good movie. Like, I think it's a really interesting and good movie. I really enjoyed watching it. It's really beautiful. The scenes in the desert were really nice. I don't think the acting is all that great, but I think it's like doing interesting things. I also don't buy Peter Fonda as like a biker gang leader.
Are you serious? He's going to eventually be an Easy Rider.
Yeah, which I also watched.
Oh, of course you did.
So he's just like, he's too artsy. I don't know. He comes off as entirely the wrong vibe for my needs.
How? He's not an awful person doing awful things to everybody. And why are these awful people together doing awful things? Like, I always have that kind of a reaction when you have these people who are awful to each other. It's like, why are you still together? Why are you a gang? Like the Reavers inside of Firefly. Like, you're awful and you hate everything. How are you a gang? Why are you together?
Exactly. There's a lot of awful people being awful to each other inside this gang. Peter Fonda is maybe not the worst of them, though he is an awful person in this, like his character is an awful person in this movie. It starts with a pretty aggressively racist scene where they beat up a Mexican gang.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot in this movie.
Seriously.
And you can see like the elements that the later films are trying to copy from this movie, because this movie is the template for all the later movies, even though they are not nearly as good and they water it down in a lot of ways and all that.
So this is the one where if I had had prior knowledge about Wild Angels being the formula, I wouldn't have been so surprised by Side Hacker.
Exactly.
Except that Side Hackers, as you say, tries to put forth a character who then is our stand-in.
Yeah, I don't know. That's my theory as to why that is more upsetting. But
fair enough.
I also watched Easy Rider, which I don't know. I don't have a lot to say about. It's a boring movie. I had the least fun of that of any of the other biker movies I watch. It's not as bad as The Naked Zoo, but it's really boring, I think, and I don't understand why people love it. Peter Fonda, Dennis Hopper, of course, who also directed it. Jack Nicholson makes not his first screen appearance, but the one where he made a big splash. One of the more tolerable roles in the film.
Oh, wow.
It's also got Michael Pataki in it, as in JC from Side Hackers.
Yeah, well, look at that.
He's got a bit part, and it's also got Toni Basil in it, because she's in everything. You know, the Hey Mickey person.
Oh, hey, Mickey, you're so fine.
Her career is wild and wonderful, and it includes being in this movie. So
how interesting.
There you go.
Well, there you go. Maybe she's the most interesting thing inside of Easy Rider for you.
Hey, everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 funchy, crunchy bites about today's experiment, Wild Rebels. Go, Chris, go.
When director William Grefé's name shows up in the opening credits, we get this exchange.
What's the extra E for?
Well, it's for I'll tell you later.
Channel J was a cable access channel in Manhattan known for its willingness to broadcast sexually explicit content, including a notorious ad for a phone sex line, 970-PEEE. As the spokeswoman Tracy would say, the extra E is for extra P.
On first sight of Jeter and the gang, and their jackets with the bold skull and crossbones design, we get this.
If you take these bikers internally, do not induce vomiting.
Now the movie will do that for you. It's like an epicac.
That Genesis album?
The MST3K crew were really fond of the word ipecac in these early episodes, and who can blame them? Syrup of ipecac is a drug that used to be used to induce vomiting. It was made from the roots of the ipecacuana plant.
Joel asks if Ipecac is the name of that Genesis album, but you big silly, you're thinking of their 1981 album, Abacab, which gets its name from the way one of the songs was originally structured. First part A, then part B, then A again, then C, then A again, and then back to B. Abacab. The song reached number 26 on the Billboard charts in the US, even with a name like that. Wild.
It's a 60s movie, so that means there's some random band showing up that we get to talk about. This movie's random band is the Birdwatchers, a Tampa-based band that released a few singles, but never made it very big outside of Florida, despite appearing on TV on Where the Action Is with Steve Alaimo.
When the Birdwatchers appear on stage, Joel says,
Ladies and gentlemen from England, the Femtones.
Not a joke that's aged particularly well, especially if he's referring to Shane Fenton and his band The Fentones, a mostly forgotten British band from the early 60s.
Shane Fenton of Shane Fenton and the Fentones wasn't actually named Shane Fenton. And also, he wasn't Shane Fenton, who also wasn't actually named Shane Fenton. Let me explain. Shane Fenton was the stage name of Johnny Theakston, who died suddenly and unexpectedly of rheumatic fever when he was only 17 years old, shortly after the band cut its first demos.
With the encouragement and blessing of the first Shane Fenton's grieving mother, the band hired a new Shane Fenton, a guy whose offstage name was Bernard Jewry. After the Fentones put out a few modestly successful singles, they broke up, and Bernard began a solo career under yet another name, Alvin Stardust. This glam rock persona was much more successful. Among Alvin Stardust's hits was 1974's My Cuckoo. And if that isn't TV's Frank's go-to karaoke song, I don't know what is.
Jeter plans to meet up with Rod and says,
We have a little unfinished business to attend to.
Yeah, they got to go past the La Bianca place.
Sure.
oh hey, this is a dark one. You know how one night back in 1968, Charles Manson and his friends murdered actress Sharon Tate and friends? Well, the next night, they murdered Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, so that's what this is referring to.
You might remember that Manson and friends were living at the Spahn Ranch, a former dairy ranch in LA that by the 60s was mostly being rented out as a movie set. You can see it in The Creeping Terror, which gets riffed in season 6, but it was also used as a set in outlaw biker movies like Satan's Sadists and Hell's Bloody Devils. Oh, and of course, it was used in Bonanza.
Rod serenades Linda out in the woods, and when the orchestra kicks in, Tom quips,
Good thing the Nelson Riddle gang is in the next cottage.
Nelson Riddle spent the 50s and 60s orchestrating pop music for all the greats. Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, as well as putting out instrumental music and music for TV, including that theme song about getting your kicks on Route 66.
Later in that song, we get this.
This is a cover of an old Christy Weasel song.
New Christy Weasels?
Yep.
I thought it was Up with Weasels. I don't know.
No idea who Christy Weasel is supposed to be, though they are making a lot of jokes about squirrels and ants singing along, so it's probably that. But the New Christy Minstrels were a folk group in the 60s, whose biggest hit was Green Green, and which launched the careers of Barry Maguire, Kenny Rogers, and Kim Carnes. Wait, Kim Carnes of Betty Davis Eyes fame? Huh.
And Up with Weasels is, of course, a reference to Up with People, which is a band, or I guess a performance group, or I guess a nonprofit. Well, anyway, they try to do nice things in the world and are incredibly painfully earnest. And during the 70s and early 80s, they performed at the Super Bowl a lot.
And finally, as Rod drives the gang into town to steal some guns, we see a few old cannons covered in rust or something. They're all brown and lumpy anyways, and they inspire Crow to say,
"Hey, they're going to the Turd Museum."
I spent my teen years wondering if there was an actual turd museum somewhere, and now I'm happy to report there is. The Museo della Merda in Piacenza, Italy, opened in 2015, and we'll have a link in our show notes. Be sure to check out the gift shop.
And that's time. Speaking of getting your kicks on Route 66, Chris. There are amazing scenic highways inside of the U.S. and, of course, I grew up on the West Coast. I am super familiar with Highway 1 going up and down the California coast and seeing all of the beautiful beachside attractions. My hometown is on Highway 1. And I always wondered if there was something equivalent on the East Coast.
Nope.
Yeah, okay. Well, shortest segment ever.
Sorry.
No, well, I mean, I would think that you would be familiar with the route that they're referring to inside of this show, the A1A in Florida. Did you ever drive it when you were on your trips down there?
So, no, I'm afraid we didn't, because when we went to Florida, which we did a lot when I was a kid, we were going to a little condo that my parents had bought with the dreams of retiring there someday. That was outside of Tampa, which is on the other side of the state, on the Gulf side. And so the A1A goes down the Atlantic coast side. And so we never did that. And we never really ventured too far down that side. I've been to Orlando a bunch, which is sort of in the middle, but I've never been down to Miami, which is way down the side. Have you?
To be honest, the only place I've ever been in Florida is Orlando to go to Disney World, because, Disney World. But my parents, of course, have done more traveling after their retirement, and they really enjoyed the Florida Keys. And the Florida Keys are one of the parts of the state that are featured on this route A1A. And of course, the reason we're bringing it up is because they do riff about it inside of the movie.
Yes.
So I was thinking about all of the wonderful coastal routes that I've been on the West Coast and wondering just what you would see if you were on the A1A.
I can't tell you that. I can tell you that if you're driving down to Tampa and you drive through Jacksonville, which I think is pretty close to where the A1A goes, but anyway, if you're driving through Jacksonville, especially if you're doing it around the time this episode came out, and you're driving down from New York City in a little tiny Chevette packed into the back, you're a tall, gangly teenager squeezed into the back seat of a two-door car that's a little tiny thing, and then you're stopped at a light in town going from one highway to the next, and there are some KKK people marching on the corners, and your mother who's driving really is very tempted to just drive into them. And your father, who's a NYPD cop at this point and ex-Air Force and all that, has to talk her down from committing manslaughter.
Wow. I mean, I think it's a dream that many of us have to drive through a KKK rally ever since watching the Blues Brothers, in which they do drive through and force all of those people to jump off of the bridge and into the river, thus causing a rift between the Blues Brothers and the KKK.
Yeah. I don't know if that's what inspired my mother, but yes.
I mean, your mother was inspired by many things, not the least of which was social justice before it was cool.
Well.
So, I don't know, Jacksonville, certainly it seems like Jacksonville is north of the main parts of the A1A, but definitely going down into like St. Augustine and going through the Keys. Apparently it's splendid and beautiful. And part of what I was doing is there's a interactive map that will put a link to that goes through the scenic A1A and goes through many of the sites that you can see. I was kind of going through it, trying to find the lighthouse
yes.
that might have been inside of this film. And of course, they just don't show rundown lighthouses that have "keep out" spray painted on the side on the glorious pictures that are on this A1A coast thing. But there are some super beautiful lighthouses.
Well, there are also only so many lighthouses, and if you spend far too much time exploring this, you will find out which lighthouse it is. I can promise you that. Let me first say, Citrusville seems to be played by a small town called Jupiter.
Nice.
Sure. I tried looking around it on Google Maps for locations. It's been a few decades, and it looks a bit different now.
Yes.
But there is a lighthouse at Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse, which is very historic and lovely and famous and doesn't look too much like the one in this movie. And I was really trying to match it up and do all sorts of accommodations in my head until I saw an interior photo, and the stairs inside the Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse have little holes in them. They're like mesh, that metal mesh thing that stairs can be made of. And I was like, that's not in this movie. No way.
No.
And they did not replace all the stairs sometime in the 70s. That's not how you do it with a lighthouse.
I mean, so my parents are still coastal, and they have a spiral staircase that is made out of metal parts that has the holes inside of it, much like might be in the interior of a lighthouse. And they have had to replace stairs many times, and they've only had that thing for 20 years or so. So it's entirely possible that they would have replaced them. But of course, if this is a historic lighthouse, they would have tried to make it look like what was there originally. So I'm agreeing with you while not agreeing with you. Just saying it's possible they've replaced all of the stairs since the 60s, but they would have done it looking the same.
I suppose so. The other thing is that this has a curved arc of an entrance rather than the boxy entrance in the one that we see. So I thought, even though the internet thinks that this might be the lighthouse, I don't think it is. And I kept looking at all the coastal lighthouses until I found the Cape Florida light in Key Biscayne, which is basically just outside of Miami. I think. I've never been to Miami. I don't know the geography, so it might be part of it, but I think it isn't. And it is very much the correct one.
There you go.
You can look at photos of it, especially older photos of it, because they have done a bit of a slap of paint on it since around 2000-ish, I think. But yes, that is the one. I don't know if they spray painted the keep out stuff for the movie, because I can't find any photos that seem to have that on it. And also there's a weird sign in the movie, if you see above the doorway, where the THE is written on the sign, but that's it. And it doesn't make any sense. That I have not seen in any other photos from this lighthouse, but there's not that many that I was able to get my hands on, and I didn't fly out to the local historic society and research their archive of photos.
Oh my gosh, Chris, why not?
Well, we need more patrons if I'm going to do that level of research.
Fair enough. My goodness. If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you've busted your teeth on something sweet and hard, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, or you can reach us on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you and our randomly selected supporter, Catherine. Thank you, Catherine. For as little as $1 an episode, you too can be like Catherine and help us research and record this show. You can join us in a friendly Discord, and you can listen to all our superfan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/136.
We're going to be on Blue Sky soon, I'm pretty sure.
Ooh.
I mean, I'm on Blue Sky. Listeners, you can find me at Word Garbler at Blue Sky. Follow me there. I've talked a little bit of MST3K already, but I'm sure the It's Just a Show official account will exist someday, I guess. I don't know. Charlotte, what are we doing next?
Well, Chris, we have one more biker movie in our biker movie summer trilogy. That's season 2, episode 9, The Hellcats.
Do you remember anything about this episode?
I mean, it doesn't have a cheery jingle for a cereal, so no.
Right.
But you were saying in our last episode that Ross Hagen is in this one as well, right?
Yeah.
So Ross Hagen, I remember him and his fabulous haircut.
Well, we'll see what you recall when we watch it. But until then...
Note to self, never negotiate with bikers hopped up on goofballs.
But do enjoy the great taste of General Foods International Ripple. Take it away, Theme Squad.